done for me lately? It's Coons. What have y'all done for us lately? And if there's no answer, the only thing we owe them.
Hey, good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk To. And tonight, me and Sister Azima, we're gonna just have a conversation, reference to what President Trump is doing, not doing, ruffling feathers, pissing people off. You know, having a real conversation about some of the things that he is doing, and getting people to realize if it's that serious, how is it going to affect melanated people? What what he is not doing, how it's affecting melanated people? Because we have to understand that all of this stuff, majority of the stuff, definitely the stuff that's pushed through social media, the internet, a lot of this stuff is basically performance. Performance from maybe the right, performance from maybe the left, but a lot of the stuff, when you look into what actually is in the executive orders that he has signed, or some of the stuff that they're trying to pass, when you look into it, it is very, very complicated. So it's hard to really understand. When you ask most people about the tariffs, they feel like the tariffs are going to hurt them, not realizing that most tariffs are for imported goods. It's a tax on imported goods and exported goods. And if you're in a partnership, a business relationship, it should be equal share. And according to him and others in his administration, America's not being treated equally, 50-50 down the line as a partnership. And we've always been paying a more percentage of stuff for America than most people. So we're just going to have a conversation, you guys. So bear with us. If you'd like to join in the conversation, you're more than welcome to join every week. What we do when we discuss this type of stuff, because one of the things that I know, and most of us should know about politics, is politics are very regional.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that go on in my area that could be hurting me could be very beneficial for Sister Azima in her area.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we can't take it and be like, oh, this is bad, this is that, when it may not even affect you. Sister Azima lives in an area where I don't think certain things would affect her where I live in. I live in a dry state. If you know about a dry state, you'll know how hard it is to get fresh fish in a dry state, and people that drink alcohol, how hard it is to get certain alcohol in a dry state. So that's just an example of sometimes where you live at, how it can affect, how certain laws can affect you where others don't. What's up, Sister Azim?
Good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing? And I do have to concur with what Brother Quentin is saying. First thing I would like to say is thank you for allowing me to be on here. And the next thing I'd like to say is that you'll hear everybody say this is a country of immigrants. Well, before any immigrants came, there were nations of people already here. The Khalifa women, we called it California, but they were the tall women, Amazon like, they were here. You had, I'm talking about the Americas, all of the Americas, okay? North, Central, and South America. But right here in the continental United States, we already had people living here. You had the Choctaw, the Shawnee, the Cheyenne, the Hopi. Okay, we can go on. They were living here. And they were not small tribes or clans. Many of them were nations. And so with nationhoods, they were building cities. Some of those nations of people were nomadic. They would, and I don't want to call them nomadic, they would follow the pattern of the buffalo that they hunted. So as the buffalo moved and grazed, their people moved along with it. Some of the other ones were already agrarian, they were growing crops. And so they didn't have a need to move to follow their food source. So you had a variety of people living here. Out of many, you had a common diversity. Out of the diversity, you had a common mindset. And so the people created their own rules and laws within their nation and then between nations so that they would be able to function under what they would consider, as Chief Mimi would say, the God of the universe, okay, the God of the sky. They didn't believe in Jesus or Mohammed or, you know, any of this. They believed in the God of the sky, that universal God. And so they lived their life like that, which is considered divine law. For them, it was called natural law or original law. And then later, when they interacted with, remember now, England sent their criminals here, just like they did to Australia. And so they began to create treaties in order to interact. And they became known as the Confederate, or the Convention of Nations of Tribes, the Mississippi tribes, or the Great Southwest tribes, or however they identified themselves. So they were here. So, you can't discover a land that's already occupied. And I have to say that to you is because every time you turn on TV, you hear everybody say, "This is a land of immigrants. It's a land of immigrants." Well, there were people here.
And see, Sister Azima, is to under to emphasize the importance of you saying that is because a person will say when you what you just said, like it was people already here. They feel like the formation of what we know as the country
Hmm.
was the beginning of when all things that was before it stopped and the new country had begun. So people may be under the impression that all of those treaties and laws basically got abolished and we
No,
were under something new.
no, no. They were not abolished. That's why Chief Mimi was talking about knowing the Constitution, knowing the origin of the laws. Those laws came from the indigenous people who were here. I can speak for the Cahokia Mounds. I'm in the Midwest, Missouri. And Missouri is touched by Iowa, Idaho, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Arkansas, parts of Texas. There are 8 states that touch us, and that includes Kentucky and Tennessee. And so we, the mound builders, which built on both sides of the Mississippi River, their they called it a compound, but their city was bigger than the city of England, which had 30,000 people living in it in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So the mound builders had 50 to 60,000 people. That's the size of a small. That's the size of a small city. So if they had 50 to 60,000 people already living here, they weren't a tribe. They were already a nation. They had already developed their society. They used the 7 principles to create the pillars to sustain a society. You know, health, governance, uh, the ability to have agriculture, education, family structure, spiritual. It was already here. So what we're dealing with now is that Trump is taking you back to the Constitution, the treaties that were made between the indigenous people who were already here and the Europeans that were sent here. Remember, the majority of them were criminals. And if they got across the water and did something to serve some time to pay off their penance or their whatever it is they had to pay to the Queen of England, then they would be released and made free. Well, think about that. They let you out of the jail. They put you on a boat. And you get over here. You think you're gonna be worried about paying the Queen back? I doubt it. You're gonna look at a way because now you're in a land. You're free. You got all of this to look at. Any place you wish to go. And so uh, what they say, there's no honor among thieves. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to break free and they're going to get out here and do what they want to do. Remember, these are the people that gave them smallpox, diphtheria, okay, whooping cough. These are the same group of people who came and raped their women. They got you believing that Pocahontas was in love with, that guy John, and she wasn't.
Hmm.
So the remember when I told you how they can manipulate words? Remember when we talked about the word faggot? And it was a bundle of sticks. So if you had faggots, you were a wealthy person. Okay. These are the same people that manipulate and massage what you say, what you do, how the words move about within their language. Remember now, even though they spoke English, many of the indigenous people here did not. They spoke their tribal language. And I have to admire them because they learned English quickly. And they had to learn the Gaelic language because of the Irish people. And they had to learn um, a rough form of Dutch language. Now, remember, the Spaniards came here, the Dutch came here, the English people, the French. And so the indigenous people learned many languages in order to be able to communicate. It's no different than when we talk about Africans. The Africans know not only their national language or tribal language or clan language, they also know French and Africana, which is the South African form of English. They know Arabic, Urdu, they may know Spanish, but they definitely know at the minimum 3 languages. So when people are being thrust upon by other cultures, I don't think the indigenous people here had an open door policy and said, hey, come on in, come on down. I'm sure they didn't have that policy. But
Yeah,
they,
and that's interesting because, like I said, most people will feel like the laws begin during the formation of what we consider 1776,
no.
and not understanding that laws, treaties, and or policies
Mhm.
were put in place prior to this formation of what they consider the government, 13 colonies, then never abolished what came before it. And now, to bring everybody up to speed with the conversation that me and Sister Azima, how the conversation even got where we're at now, we were talking about. And it's very important. I know a person can Google and look up fascism and Marxism. That's very easy to do.
Mhm.
But we have to understand what came before that
Yes.
to get to that. So we can't. And I know that it's very some very intelligent people and smart people who watch the show who know this stuff.
Mhm.
However, before we can even get to that, we need to understand what came before that and how, when you label somebody with these ideologies, if they have this ideology or don't they have this ideology, how dangerous it could be for what is going on now. In reference to that, guys,
Mhm.
to make it short, so Sister Azima can get back, we were talking about birthright citizenship
Mhm.
and how if SCOTUS looks into this case, we've been saying it for a couple of weeks, and we need to really, really emphasize what can be impacted, not just for um, when they look into the case and if they affirm anything or deny anything. But we need to look into the wording of what they say and what they don't say. And it should be a case that will be monumental if they look into the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and understand the language that was in there and who they were referring to with birthright citizenship and how far the scope of what they were referring to and who they were referring to goes. It
Mhm.
is very, very important, and it will really, in my personal opinion, I don't know how Sister Azima feels. She'll let you guys know. It will reshape this country, and the reason why I say that is because SCOTUS does not go around reshaping the laws. The only time SCOTUS goes into a case, the case has to come before them,
Mhm.
and then once they have to look into the case,
Mhm.
that's where the reshaping of the law comes in it. So they don't just wake up one day and say, "Well, I'm gonna change the Constitution," or we're gonna interpret the Constitution this way.
Mhm.
When the case is before them,
Mhm.
they're gonna interpret the case. They're gonna
Mhm.
try to understand what, as they say, the writers of the Constitution intended, because you'll hear that language a lot.
Mhm.
And it's gonna be a bunch of legal jargon,
Mhm.
but it's gonna be very important on what is affirmed and what is not affirmed. Because you have to write a summary on the affirmation or what you deny or whatever.
Mhm.
However, whichever portion of birthright citizenship you go into. Sister Azima, I apologize for that.
Oh,
Take
that's
it.
okay. That's wonderful because you're saying everything we had talked about before. And if you remember when Chief Mimi was talking, she pointed out that the Constitution is framed and written around the treaties and the compacts and the compromises that the nation people came up with and introduced it to the framers in the 13 colonies so that it was clear delineation as to what they could and could not do. However, when you have criminals, they're going to do what's best for them and their group. Therefore, they're going to take the law right to the edge before they get shot or hunted down or anything like that. So their freedom from England and Ireland, France, allow them the opportunity to escape into the larger aspect of the United States of America Corporation, Inc. Corporation, which sits within North America because Canada, Alaska, and the United States are all sitting on North America. And so when these people were able to get here by hook or crook or whatever, they may have had to do some penal colony type work because it's supposed to be a penal colony for them. But the minute they were able to get them shackles off and get up out of there, they ran. They ran out into the larger world and they had no intentions of going back. And of course, water seeks its own company. It's going to find other people that are like minded like them. And if those people were already murderers and all of that, this is what you brought here. and you release them. And so now the people who were already at peace had to take up a position of war. And of course, they make, the indigenous people the villain. The things that those criminals did to their own people, let alone to melanated skinned people, they assumed that because we were peaceable, we were weak, and we were not. And when they found out that we weren't, that's when they took a pack mentality. And it's like living in the desert. I learned one thing: you don't feed one coyote by accident, because you have to feed them all. And if you do not, they pack against you. And so these people came here criminals. Some came for religious persecution. So they're going to bond together because, remember now, they are the few, and everybody else like us was the many. And so they mistook our kindness for weakness and decided we're going to do this. The Constitution was framed around all of these treaties, all of these compacts that they had made with all these different nations of people, because America's diversified. And in that diversity, they had a unified mindset, a unified principle. And they lived that principle. Remember, I was telling you, once you know divine law and original law and natural law, you will live it. And when you live it, you have an entirely different outlook on life. These people had never experienced that. Never.
And it's very important for everyone to understand that when Sister Azima says that when you look at the Constitution and you look at why they signed this Constitution, and if you look at it just the way that they teach it in most schools nowadays without civics class, it's signed by a bunch of people that they say was authors. Why did they sign a contract to themselves?
You wouldn't. You
You
don't
would
sign.
never sign a contract to yourself. So
Right. So
knowing that and them never telling that makes you
mhm,
wonder, this is a contract. Why they sign it to themselves? No, they signed it to, like Sister Azim said, like Chief Mimi have been explaining,
mhm.
it was to the indigenous people that was here.
And it was not ratified until September of 1779. It was not July 4th, 1776.
Yeah.
Never was.
And understanding, I know most people may not ever heard of the term or understood the term. There's four states in the Union that are Commonwealth:
Mhm.
Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Massachusetts, and Virginia. So you ask yourself, what's the difference between a Commonwealth and a regular state? It really is not no difference, but there is something that's very interesting if you ever look up the definition. Through a deliberate designation in its official founding documents, like
Mhm.
its constitution, rather than through an inherent legal or political distinction.
Mhm.
Each state in the Union has its own constitution.
Mhm.
So some of the things that they would have taught us in civics class, for those who came late, and when I mean came late, they took civics out of schools in the
Mhm.
early 80s. For
Mhm.
those of us that came late, they taught you in your particular state, your
Mhm.
state constitution.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, they stopped teaching that because this is why we're at where we're at now, where a lot of people are educating themselves on these type of laws, treaties, and policies,
Mhm.
that we start to see in the wording of what was said, why it was said,
Mhm.
what particular places, what particular places had treaties,
Mhm.
what particular places didn't have treaties, why certain states have always had partnership, far as free trade and so forth and so on. But Sister Azima.
The Great West was considered a territory and not necessarily states.
Mhm.
And then you have to learn how states got their shapes, all of those crazy things. Missouri has in the southern part of Missouri, it has like a leg that comes down in one part of it. And when we did the history on it and found out what was happening there was that that leg that came down was supposed to have been part of Oklahoma. Um, some brothers got into a disagreement. The disagreement spilled over to becoming something like the Hatfields and the McCoys. And with that, Missouri ended up with this hook because one brother decided, I'm not going to allow you to come into this area and harm these family members that I married into. And so that's how Missouri got that hook. Some of the other states is along the same lines. So they are also cutting these state lines through territories that belong to the Cherokee or the Apache. Okay. And in cutting those people off from other family members, it's kind of like at the end of World War II when the Berlin Wall went up, it went right down the middle of the city, and families were cut off from each other. And so this is what they did when they had territories. They didn't have enough soldiers to handle the territory, so they would hire outlaws and made them the long arm of the law, which was just it became a nightmare. And so you have all of these different groups of criminal elements running around, aligning themselves. Not only are they stealing from each other, but they're stealing from everywhere. There was no loyalty. And that's why the army was fighting the criminals and all this kind of stuff. And that's where you get a lot of your heroes, like the Lone Ranger, and that was a black guy. And then you have Annie Oakley. She was a black woman. Um, the original cowboys were young black men that ran from slavery.
Mhm.
Had um, a myriad of things going on at the time, which is which was causing a lot of internal strife among the nations of Indians, the Iroquois, the Mississippians, the Missourians, the Hopi. You had all of this going on, and while it was going on, it was creating dissension among these nations of people that were trying to overcome a lot of things. Some of the diseases they had never seen, never had to be in contact with it, and now they were. And their people were dying rapidly, and they didn't have a way to address it or subvert it because they didn't know what it was or how to address it or fix it. And so they were doing everything in their power to try to get to a point where there was some form of stabilization within themselves. And so the Constitution became that stabilization. It became the overarching um, law of the land with the nation of Indigenous people. And it was supposed to teach the immigrants who came here how to act or interact with all of these nations of people that were here.
I'm
And
here.
a lot,
Just keep talking. My
and a
camera's
lot of
acting up.
them couldn't. That was also the time they began to send mail order brides. Many of these men couldn't read or write, but they didn't want to be here without a woman. And so remember now, they were sending not only their criminal element, but they were sending a lot of working women prostitutes, that kind of thing. Women who were unscrupulous, who were willing to take your money. Um, just a myriad of stuff that was going on. And with that, you now have these women who are coming in here and they're bringing their own personal issues and they are violent towards their men. Because a lot of times I don't understand the relationship between white women and white men. I know that overall, black men do have a very respectful view of black women. It's changing now, but at one time it wasn't like that. They were always very respectful to us, and we were respectful to our men. Didn't mean that we didn't have disagreements, but what I had always seen, and I'm paraphrasing, this is my own opinion, was that there was a deep-seated distrust and dislike among them, men and women. And you can even see it now when they talk, women need to only have this, men need to only have that, women need to know their place. And I'm kind of like, when you're working in divine law, natural law, everything is interchangeable except for the role of reproduction, birthing of children that stays within our realm. But everything else is interchangeable. Women could ride horses. They knew how to hunt, and they had to. But it was never a situation where it was always distrust, disunity. And so the Constitution can't address all of those personal things, but what it does is that it does give us 27 amendments and the first 10 of the Bill of Rights that allow us to maintain human dignity, that allows us to maintain natural law, that allows us to continue forward with presenting all the things that we need to be safe when immigrants come onto our land. And we now, for the last, 200 years, you've seen how we didn't have it. And I'm going to bring this to your attention, like the critical race theory piece. They're going to tell you it's all about racism and teaching racism in the school, but it's not. What critical race theory is about, it only affects the judiciary and legislative branch of government, because their role is to look at laws that were put into place, enacted through policies, statutes, and codes, and how those policies, statutes, and codes were discriminatory. And critical race theory's purpose was to go back through and look at all of those discriminatory practices and see if they're still on the books, and that these states can pull them up out of their books at a time when they're going to be enacting their state constitutions. And what that does is that their state constitutions need to align with the larger constitution, which says you can't do certain things against certain bodies of people, or certain clusters of people, or certain nations of people. And we don't want you to enact or interpret your version of the policies. They have to adhere within these guidelines. And so that's what Trump is trying to, that's Trump's mission. It's not his mission. It's the mission in which the people collectively voted and said to him loudly, including Black folks. Now think about it. When he was brought up under all these charges with all these attorneys, Miss James, and then somebody else and somebody else. And the bottom line was, when he showed up in places like Atlanta or Texas or, you know, North Carolina, South Carolina. What did the black people do? They came out and they said, yo, you're like one of us now. You know what it's like to be arrested. You know what it's like to have these laws enacted against you. You now know what it's like.
Let me ask you, Sister Azim, and I apologize, you guys, for what's weird is that I have two of the same cameras. I'm one of them weirdos that I like two of everything, and I have two of the same cameras. And the camera that I have been using with my laptop, it started going out, and it just went and went. So I'm right next to my other camera, so I had to switch the camera. So I apologize for that. But Sister Azima is explaining, what's going on in the template of this. Like I'm gonna keep saying, further discussion, because you'll know that every time we meet on Tuesdays, even every other Tuesday where Chief Mimi will be joining us, why we're continue going over policy,
Hmm.
which is not law.
No.
Policies, treaties, laws, and
Hmm.
how those three things, and we see it and just to explain it for the people in the chat who we've seen 4 and 5 different presidents. Whether
Hmm.
you voted for that president or not, you'll always hear, "Oh, he couldn't do anything." That, and we're saying, whether you like President Trump or not, we're saying that you can do a lot. We're saying that uh, you can get a lot of stuff done. Um, we don't. Most of us didn't understand what executive orders were until President Obama jumped on the scene, where he signed a lot of executive orders. Actually, the
Hmm.
most important executive order that we really should know is the Emancipation Proclamation. That is an executive order. That was not a law.
Hmm.
So, as Sister Azima explains this to us, and then you hear of President Trump doing all this stuff, and you be like, man, this guy's losing his mind. Like, why is he doing this? Why is he attacking the IRS, which is not a form of the United States government? Why
Mm-mm.
is he why is he going after the Fed, which is not a form of the United States government?
Hmm.
And why is he doing these tariffs? What business deals was going on? What happened? Most of us remember with NAFTA and that deal that former President Obama got us into. So
Yeah.
all of these deals and trades and stuff like this, these are important in the grand, I hate to use this word, the grand scheme of things, and
But
how
it
it's
is a
going to,
scheme. Hmm.
yeah, and how it's going to affect us. I know, not personally, but affectionately, with doing these shows with Sister Azima. She explains how she is someone that lets people know they ain't touched Social Security. So that's all a lie, and
Hmm.
that's all a bunch of just nonsense that they've been spewing, that they're going to affect Social Security. And furthermore, Sister Azim, you want
Let
to
me say
reiterate
this.
on that?
Right. My son-in-law, he's a licensed certified barber and cosmetologist, and he teaches. And he did my hair. I love it. I love it. His students are very good. Okay, so I'm gonna give him a plug. But he's a retired veteran, and he's been in every branch of the military, literally every branch of the military: the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines. Okay, he's been in every branch in the Coast Guard. So we were talking the other day, and he goes, "Yeah, Mom, the VA is getting ready to shut the hospitals down." I'm like, "Why?" He said, "Oh, you didn't know? They're not part of the military." I went, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Yeah, they're not. They're third party hospitals. They get funding, but they don't have to serve us because there's no legal binding reason." And I'm like, "Oh, whoa, whoa, educate me." So it turns out that when Trump found out that many of the veteran hospitals are not a part of the United States military, he feels that the veterans need their own hospital. We don't need a hospital that says Veteran Administration, but it is controlled by Born Jewish Children, or Shepherd Hospital from someplace, or Cheverly Hospital from Maryland. These hospitals need to be managed, controlled, owned, and operated by the military to
And and,
serve.
and it's very important. I happen to live when I lived in New Jersey. I lived by two VA hospitals within a nice mileage of two VA hospitals. One VA hospital was like playing in my backyard. And where I live now is a VA hospital. If you've ever visited someone in a VA hospital, took someone in a VA hospital,
It's a
the
nightmare.
resources, it's a disaster area.
It
Uh,
is.
the resources is really bad. If that veteran that you're with still
Mm-hmm.
has their faculties,
Mm-hmm.
I bless them. I thank them for their service because what goes on at the VA is they're not being taken care of. And Sister Azim, I want to ask you a question because when you were talking, when I mentioned Social Security, I seen the smile on your face, and I want to ask you a question, and this is very important because I know a lot of people may have felt as though with the tariffs, and then they saw that stock market go down, and we all know that a lot of pensions is tied up with the stock market. I want to ask you a question that only an elder can explain it.
Mm-hmm.
How did they fool us with leaving pensions and going to 401k?
Well, when I was younger, the 90,000 businesses that closed their doors and were forced to interact with people in India and Vietnam in the Asiatic belt, the system was set up that when you worked your 30 years, you retired. The company worked with a financial advisor and put your retirement money. Now, understand this, you work, you put money into your retirement. Your company matches the money that you put in your retirement. And so, in all of the states where you had large automobile manufacturing companies, it didn't matter if they were Union 602 or Union 1, all of their retirement money, every dime that they made that went into their retirement money, every pay period, every 2 weeks, 26 times a year, which is really 13 months, the company matched it. And then in the end, the company would have someone on their payroll system that stayed in touch with the investor and said, Miss So and so's retired, and Jeff over here is retired, and this is what he put in, and based on his salary and all of that. And then in the end, the check came to you through the company's retirement plan. As they
Hmm.
shut those companies down, politicians were telling you, well, we have to step in. That's where Enron and all of them came. And
Hmm.
they stepped in to take over. And as they took over, they dug into your money. They couldn't touch the actual trust that the money was in, but they could touch the interest that came off of that. And that allowed them to have a greater monopoly over how things went. So when you are downsizing, forcibly shrinking these companies and forcing them out. Carl Icahn was one. He came and got rid of TWA. Okay. And I say that
But
because TWA was a local airline.
explain what TWA was. We all know. For me, it was just the airlines. Explain the dynamics of TWA and why it was so important.
Missouri is a staunch union state, no different than New York being, a union state. Here's the difference. Even though we had a lot of prejudice going on, when it came to the union, the black and white folks came together. You weren't going to separate us because you black and I'm Hispanic or Italian. That's not how it worked. In Missouri, the union was the most important thing. TWA was the only airline at that time that was not owned by a wealthy individual. It was owned by all of the workers who worked for TWA. They were proud of the fact that they were all owners and shareholders and stock owners. Therefore, when the company made money, what happened to their pension? It made money. And when people retired, they could retire on $40,000. Now remember, I'm 74, so they could $40,000 is equal to 200,000 now. They were living well. What that did was that it told those, now remember, you had criminals coming here from England in the beginning. Many of them made their mark. The Kennedy family did in oil. Okay, no different than you know the Bilderbergers and all of this. They made their money in assets by hook or crook. And I don't care what anybody tells you. Oh, I'm a nice person. That's how I got to be a half a trillionaire. That's not true. You did some shaky business to get there. Let's just be realistic. That's the way it is. And so their policies overshadow the natural law, the divine law, because they're talking to each other. Like George Carlin said, he was trying to tell this black guy who was saying, "You always say it's conspiracy and it's racism." He says, "No, I don't have to say it because they sent their kids to school." And I'm going to show you how that works. When the Italian families were the mafia, which means family, okay, they got together. What did they do? Their first two or three sons, they kept them in the business. But everybody else, the grandchildren, the nieces and stuff, they sent them to college. You're going to be the judge. You're going to be the lawyer. You're going to be the chief of police. Why? Because how can you control crime if you don't put your people in key places to do certain things? And that's what they did. Over time, their children are now there. They're rooted in that lifestyle. What do? They put their children in that same thing.
Yeah, you guys in the chat is very important. When you look at, what Sister Azima was saying in the analogy she made, you'll know if you understand the history of the Irish Americans, you'll begin to see how a lot of the Irish Americans became law enforcement in this country,
Right.
and,
And
and
so,
why they chose law enforcement, and the
mm,
reasons and some of the things that the Irish Americans, um, up until recently, was still uh, beefing with the Anglo-Saxon in Europe,
right,
and the tribal war that has been going on for centuries amongst them.
right. And you really have to look at their history to see how it impacts us because they carried these tribal wars. Okay. People say Germany and Dutch. The German, the Deutsch language is German. The Dutch language is German. It's called Deutsch. So if you don't know that, okay, then you're missing out on a key piece. They carry a grudge. It's lifelong.
And even if like you said about a policy, it, what most people don't know is even if you say we're going to have a quote unquote treaty, if that treaty is not upheld, what I mean, if our trade is not fair,
Hmm.
if I have a trade war
Hmm.
against you, then that treaty is broken. And understand that, and this goes into why I'm shocked, on a personal level, of why so many people who say that they're American, and I'm not going to say that they're not American, why so many people who say they're American are siding with what this country has got going on with China, and not understanding that China did not have an economy into the last 30 years when basically, and I'll say it, we began to say cheap labor, which is nothing but a code word for saying slave
For
labor,
slave, for slave.
for slave labor. Um, so I didn't want to take too much of the discussion and go too far, but you could proceed, Sister Azima, because
Well,
I
we're
don't
going
want
to talk. You brought it up, tariffs and all of this good stuff. I want you to know about James Monroe for the Monroe Doctrine. I'm going to read it to you real quick. The Monroe Doctrine, proclaimed by President James Monroe in 1823, stated that the Western Hemisphere, this is at the height of slavery in America, the Western Hemisphere, you hear what he said, Western Hemisphere. Why? Because we are west of what country? What continent? Africa. Think about that. We are west of Africa. Okay, so the Western Hemisphere was made up of North and South America. What happened to Central America? That's where Mexico is, Nicaragua. Okay. He was only concerned about North and South America, was no longer open to European colonization. Let me say that again. The Monroe Doctrine, proclaimed by President James Monroe in 1823, stated that the Western Hemisphere, known as North and South America, was no longer open to European colonization. It also declared that the United States would not interfere in European affairs and would view any European intervention in the Americas as a threat to its own security.
to.
Okay? So, in key point, no intervention in what goes on in Europe. You can fight your own wars. We're not going over there to help you. You must stay away from the Western Hemisphere, which is North and South America. No more colonizing. There's a reason, because every time they colonize, when they come in and they send their cartel people, you have major problems. They disrupt the Constitution or the laws that we're under because they do policy enforcement, they do code enforcement, they do um, regulations. Nothing, they never get anything passed through Congress. It's always an act, but never a law. Okay. And then the intervention in America as a threat. Anytime they come into America, they would see that as a threat. So what did he do? He enforced tariffs, kept them out.
See, the thing that I find amazing is we have become, and they willed out. Excuse the expression, they willed out former President Biden the last few weeks, and he has basically been using his neocon talking points, his talking points in reference to us being the police force of the world. And he actually said that he is in fear that NATO would disband. And we know, those who follow enough about President Trump, is that he does not think the benefit of NATO. He feels as though if we're going to be part of NATO, everybody need to put in their fair share, equal share into NATO. And if he could have his way, we would not be part of NATO. What is your thoughts with what you just read, far as how we allowed ourselves to interfere with Europe, and then based on what you just read under Monroe Doctrine, that was not supposed to happen under no
No,
circumstances.
no. And how do we get to China? Let me tell you how we got to China. America, United States of America, had allowed the Federal Reserve Bank and its minions run away with the money. Now, you must understand, we are operating under something called a fiat currency. And I can't get into all of that, but fiat currency is not real. It's pieces of paper that at one time used to state on there, this money can be redeemed for legal tender in the form of gold or silver coins. The value of them does not change. Everybody has gold around the world, everybody has silver. Over time, when presidents like Carter, Johnson, Ford, Nixon eradicated having paper currency backed by legal tender, an asset, it left the door open for us to have credit. Credit, I took bookkeeping and accounting. Go and look up. Credit is not an asset, it's a debt. Credit is debt. So when you have an 800 credit score, that means you can handle $800,000 worth of debt. Is that realistic for you?
So for the guys for the guys and gals that used to gamble, and it makes me laugh when Sister Azima always brings it up because I used to call myself trying to gamble. That's like gambling, excuse the expression, that's like gambling on ass. That's like waging a bet and you don't have the money.
You don't
And
have the money.
then, depending on what type of gambler you used to be,
Mhm,
you used to have to shoot or fight your way up out of that gambling house if you lost and
mhm,
you bet on ass and you didn't have them to cover for it.
mhm,
So understanding during a certain time in this country, like Sister Azima said, up
mhm,
until Reagan came
mhm.
and what Reagan did and some of the stuff that he allowed during his presidency,
Yes,
we bought things with money. You
money.
had $500 and you wanted to buy a car, you
Mhm,
had the $500. It was no, we're going to run your credit score. It was no credit.
mhm, mhm,
So with credit and everybody buying, borrowing
mhm,
off of air, well, which I'm gonna say ass,
mhm,
because if somebody don't pay you, you're
mhm.
gonna put your foot in their behind.
Well, not only that, what it does is that it enslaves you.
Exactly.
It totally enslaves you, which means that you don't own your house, you don't own your car, you don't own anything in your bank account. That's why when the Internal Revenue Service came, the banks were able to collect your money because you have none. And they went to using your labor. Your labor became the means of taking care of everything. Your labor. So it went from having just melanated skinned people enslaved to having everybody enslaved because we gave you credit.
So to summarize what we're talking about and why it's important is that we're talking about a president, right, wrong, or indifferent, who, whether we believe it or not,
Mhm,
whether we believe him or not,
mhm,
whether we think it could be done or not,
mhm,
he's actually dismantling a system
mhm,
that has been so ingrained, I'll say, in the last 50 years, as far
mhm,
as credit and so forth and so on, that it 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 is going to change the structure of what we've been noticed as the norm.
mhm,
Just imagine that most of us who, when you like they say, when you go you buy a house or you get an apartment,
mhm,
most of us get lights, electricity on credit. You don't go down there and give them money first. They'll give you the credit. They'll turn your stuff on and say, "Oh, you just pay the bill when it comes."
mhm,
So without that, I'm not saying that credit is going to go away, but without that and the structure of debt,
mhm,
this is why our deficit has
mhm,
has gone up and never went the opposite way in so long because
mhm.
at one time we did not have a deficit.
No, we didn't. And you didn't have a deficit. Also, a couple of things I want to say here. Unlike previous presidents, what did Trump learn from his first presidency? He didn't have a vice president when he ran because his whole purpose was to make sure Bernie Sanders won and not Hillary, to split the vote and the people would vote for Bernie. Nobody wanted Bernie. Nobody wanted Hillary. So he, remember when he won the presidency, the look on his face was one of shock. I didn't expect this. So he didn't have any of the people, he didn't have any cabinet people for himself. And I think everybody forgot. He brought his business friends in with him, the sleep pillow guy and the man that did international investing. And in less than 90 days, they were out. Okay, they were out because the system was built to attack them, and they began to tear their business down, forcing them to go overseas. And so if they didn't want to go overseas, they had to step back from him. So what he learned was that that whole time, remember, look who he has around him. He put people in place that have the same mindset that he has. And he blew everybody out the box. He don't like women. 50% of his cabinet is women. He don't like people of color. 25% of his cabinet is color. He don't like homosexual. The treasury man is a homosexual man. Okay?
And
Right.
even so much, if you look at his inauguration,
Right. So
uh,
so
Bizios was there, and he won at Bizios 2 weeks ago because what happened with Amazon is that they said that they were going to up their prices because of the tariffs. Tariffs are not supposed to affect, and I hope that he forms a commission. Well, we know that with tariffs with China is suspended for 90 days, but tariffs are not supposed to affect the everyday consumer.
no, it
Don't
doesn't.
listen to these people on the news, you guys. Mainstream media is lying.
Mhm.
Tariffs are not supposed to affect the consumer.
Okay,
We're
so
not supposed to be affected by tariffs, you guys.
right. So here's the next thing. You're gonna hear a lot. Oh, they're recalling all of the food. Please, please stop. They're in Missouri. Missouri is paying people who live outside of the suburbs to have small cattle farms, chicken ranches, all of that. And you can go out there and buy your eggs. Okay? You can go out there and get a slab of beef because Trump knows that's what they need to do. It is the small company that keeps America afloat. Okay. After Reagan did what he did, every other president sold our debt to China. China got what, a billion people, but they couldn't employ them. And a lot of them, the younger people, were leaving the rural areas to come into the city because no services were going to be provided in the rural areas. And so China had to find a way to do something with them because the rural area of youth, which was outnumbering their senior citizens, were in the cities creating havoc. You all forgot about Tiananmen Square and all these places, where they were boycotting and protesting, and China had to go in there. They locked down their whole country for a period of time to get it under control. So America cut a deal. Said, here's the deal. We'll give you debt. China said, we'll take your debt and we'll take your trash. Do you know America doesn't have a place to put trash? We produce too much plastic. We don't need to produce it. I never grew up on plastic. We had egg cartons made of paper, okay? We had milk cartons for the milk, or glass or milk jugs for milk. Paper was a minimal. We didn't have plastic stuff. So they sold their trash because for a while they were sending their trash to the Philippines and every place else. Nobody wanted it. So they sold it to China. And what did China do? Creative as they are, I have to give them credit. They sent it back to us. They shut businesses down. The political structure began to shut American businesses down. And they had to go to China. And China took all of our trash and sent it back to us as clothing, combs, toothbrushes, chairs, um, packaging, as that fake rice. They sent it back to us in every way possible. And then people got sick. I remember the time when America said it's just cost too much money to make our own steel. So they were getting steel from China, poor quality, poor quality. Buildings began to collapse. Lawsuits were flying everywhere. Okay. The next big thing was talcum powder. Remember that big, oh, your talcum powder, it's this, it's that, and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of women died. Some of the healthiest women in the world never ate any of that cancerous stuff, but they died because of the talcum powder. Found out China was the producer. Then the next big thing was houses made in the late 80s, mid 80s to late 80s. And it turned out what you call drywall, sheetrock, was filled with some type of lead. And once it got wet, people were dying from problems, lead poisoning and other carcinogenic things. Those houses they had to tear down because they couldn't resell them. It meant that they had to be built from the ground up. So they just tore them down, forced people out. People lost their shirts. So when you look at what we're saying, the enemy from within has elevated their children to a level of doing crime through policies, codes, procedures, and regulations.
And it's very important, you guys. And you know, I mess with Doctor Short, and I see certain things with Doctor Short, and he always corrects me, and we have this like running joke. But Sister Azima always, when I do shows with her, she welcomes the term when I called her an elder,
Hmm.
and it's very important to understand when you're talking to an elder, um, they will give you insight, and this is important for us that are, I'll say, 45 or lower. It's important for us to understand that if there was a time not too long ago that we did not have all this federal government into our business.
Mm-mm,
And this is what un, uh, whether we like it or not,
mm-mm,
this is what I personally want President Trump to do:
mm-mm,
get the federal government out of my personal life and my affairs. And
mm-mm,
if you live in a state that has major infrastructure issues,
mm-mm,
you'll notice that they are building, they are getting this infrastructure together. If you live in a place like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago,
blue states.
you'll notice that it is a lot of regulations and red tape just to open up a business in their major populated areas.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's going on. This is why, in like Sister Hazima said it, in the red states, in the areas that aren't so regulated, those states individually are thriving
Mm-hmm.
because of understanding what has went on the last 30, 40 years with all these regulations, building, not no manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these states are giving out tax-free abatements for companies to build, because when you have, I'm gonna give you guys an example. You have a company like Goodyear who
Mm-hmm.
are making tires and stuff like that. You put Goodyear in a city, a rural city in America,
Mm-hmm.
and that company will transform the economy in that city
Mm-hmm.
overnight.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in New Jersey. Campbell's Soup left Camden, New Jersey in the 80s. Not the corporate offices, but the factory.
Mm-hmm.
Camden has never survived
Mm-mm.
when they left Camden, New Jersey.
Mm-mm.
Campbell is still making soup,
Mm-hmm.
but Camden has never survived. So that's just some of the things when you hear all
Mm-hmm.
these words like manufacturing, you know, bringing companies back in America. This is what he's been doing and making these deals. And I know a lot of people may be like, well, why is he making all these deals? And he's making these deals to bring manufacturing. And there was a time in this country where this country was the industrial country.
Yes.
We produced a lot of stuff, and then we stopped. We just came to a screeching halt. It wasn't a transition into the technology age. We came to a halt in the 80s. Like, just
Mhm.
put the brakes on immediately. And like Sister Azima just explained, companies started having to go and get cheap labor
Mhm.
in China to produce. Y'all know when y'all get on the phone with your when something goes on with your business and you get on the phone, we should be offended that we're talking to somebody who don't speak the language that we speak, and we can't even get nothing clear. Not saying that they don't deserve the opportunity
Mhm.
to make money, but these places are being outsourced, and it's hurting who? The consumer.
Can I say
'Cause we
something
go ahead.
about that whole thing right there? There are a lot of I'm gonna call them fast eddies because for a while I did that
I got
flipping,
a story
you know,
about him too. I
okay,
know him. I
fix
knew
and
him.
flip.
I knew Fast Eddie.
Oh, okay, fix and
Yeah.
flip. And I had to get out. I had to get out because all of a sudden, me and three other ladies, all of a sudden, the pressure came on us that we would have to hire a virtual assistant who was in Thailand. I'm like, she don't know nothing about America. She can't look at an American map and say, "Oh, Miss So and So, you're on Duncan Street in Ohio." She can't say that. And we ended up getting out of that business for that reason. Now I see a lot of other folks come in and say we can do this in real estate and we can do that. And black people have those black people that made it through, they have an entirely different, they have um, a holistic approach to to business, where the European has a very singular approach to business. How does it benefit me? How am I going to make that money and make my life better? They don't care about anybody else. I just need to make my stuff better. And what I'm seeing that shift. And I'm saying that to you, that you're going to see that shift as well. And it's not always the worst thing in the world. And like he was saying about my Social Security is intact. I like the fact that it's intact. I also like the fact that I will not have to pay taxes anymore on my Social Security. Because I'm telling you that when I retired, I was paying 20% tax in Social Security, which is insane. I'm retired. But that's how the previous system was set up. And now I don't have to worry about that. What I did become angry about was the fact that under USAID, they were allowed to siphon the interest off of our trust fund and give some of it to George Soros and Bill Gates and all of them. That was supposed to be my COLA money, cost of living increase money. But I didn't get a cost of living. We didn't for 8 years. And then they make you believe, like, well, the government made a decision. Bernie Sanders, retired people need to have a cost of living increase. And I'm like, shut up. You're not helping us. And then when you get the increase, they make it look like they did us a favor. They did not. They said, and I quote, he's going to shut down all of those offices and people won't be able to get there. Well, let me tell you what he's going to shut down. Missouri, like many states, you have offices run by the Kiwanis Club or the Brotherhood of whoever. Those are private offices. So when you go in to do whatever business taking care of you one thing you can't do is pay your taxes there. You cannot pay taxes, but you can go in and get your license on your car and all that kind of stuff, or you can go in and take care of uh, modifying your Social Security. There is a fee that they charge. The fee is 15% of whatever the dollar amount is of you doing business with them. He said,
Mhm.
we have government buildings. Let's shut down all these privately held entities so that people don't have to go in there and pay an extra fee to get their driver's license updated or whatever, or to go in and take care of their Social Security business or whatever. Many of those offices were privately held offices that were doing business with the government. When he shut those down, that means that now when the people go in and who they're talking to, they can tell them, oh, well, Mr. or Miss So and so, this is the procedure. You need to do this, this, and this. Sign this right here, and I can help you. I have been in those offices, and they'll say, well, we can't help you. You need to go to the main office and get this piece of paperwork and come back. If I'm going to the main office, I'm not coming back to you.
Or it's a system update.
Right. I'm not coming back to you. So that's what he did. He shut down these third party vendors who were leasing offices and allowing the government to sublease from them.
Mm.
They weren't even government people. They were people who were trained to come in and kind of answer your questions, but really couldn't help you. And so to me, that made me happy because now I can get more of my Social Security money and not less. Not less at all. And I like the fact that there'll be no more dyes in my food. I thank Robert Kennedy for that. I thank him for the fact that children are not going to have vaccines that have mercury in them. Okay, thermosol mercury, look that stuff up. They say, oh, it's not a whole lot. It's a smaller amount, but it's the only mercury that can be absorbed by the brain. That's crazy. I have an autistic grandson due to vaccinations.
So
He was fine until he got his next rounds of vaccinations and he just, everything went, the lights went out. So the things that I see, these were the things that I was demanding a president to do. And just so you know, Barack Obama, go back and look at him. He returned 3,200,000 illegal immigrants the 8 years he was in office.
who's known as
Also the one that,
deporter in chief, right?
right. He was also the one that had those children in the cages. And they blamed that on Donald Trump, and he wasn't even president at the time. When he came in, that was at the end. They still had children in cages. And I think before he got out in his first term, he went from 1,700 children who were in cages down to 400 and something. And that's because they were looking only for the legal parents of those children.
Wow.
So there's a lot that you have to unpack. That's why we have to go back. I encourage everybody, please get a paper copy or hardback copy of the Constitution, not on Wikipedia, because we can change it up at the drop of a hat. And get some of the other hardbacks, Black Laws Dictionary, please. It's imperative to have it because now it becomes source material. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to eliminate source material. Because if you don't have source material, you're not going to know what's going on. And I'm not going to say Trump is going to be everything. Trump is here because Trump loves America, the United States of America. He's not in love with South America or Central America or even Canada. He's just in love with the United States of America. But he wants it to act the way it should have with the indigenous people and the constitutions and treaties that were in place. And that's what impacts us as people of color. Okay.
Well, you just gave us a nice. We're gonna leave it. We're gonna leave it at that. Remember, you guys, like, share, subscribe, and best way to help the channel grow is to hit that like button, share the broadcast, subscribe to the channel, tell a friend to tell a friend. This is every Tuesday that we have this discussion with Sister Azima, and then every other week with Chief Mimi is going to join us. And we're in no rush to get to the end of the discussion. We haven't even really scratched the surface because the conversation, it took a couple hundred years and
Mm,
so forth to get to us to this point. So the conversation and to allow us to conversate around
mm,
each topic, discussion, law,
mm,
policy, treaty.
mhm,
It's very important. And realize that majority of the things that come never abolish that came before it, and it's very important that when you dealing with law, um, that you know that
mhm,
we're just laymen, as they would say.
mhm.
But as the elders always told us, if you knew better, you do better. So
Right, right.
it's incumbent upon every last one of us to know what's going on and how to go about everything. With that, appreciate everybody in the chat for joining us. Until next time, take care, and we will see you guys next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Thank you.